Welcome to this webinar on Notes and Document Management Link, Tips and Tricks. My name is Nathalie and today I'm joined by Steve and Anne from Orchid, as well as Nancy from RLA to do part of the presentation. As usual, you'll be sent a link to the recording next week. So without further ado, we're going to start the presentation and we'll be back in just over 50 minutes for Q&A.
Thanks for joining this presentation. My name is Nathalie from Orchid, and today we will focus on Notes and Document Management Link for Sage 300, what's new and some tips to using those modules. You may have read our latest blog on the purpose of an office in 2022. If you haven't, I recommend you read it. Thinking about the role of an office, it's hard not to think of an office as a repository of post-it notes and big folders. Information Manager, and in particular Notes and DML, can be seen as a digital extension of the traditional office with post-it notes and large binders. Except they're not stuck on your walls or on your desk. They are in Sage 300. In the last 2 years, with more people working from home, we have seen a strong push towards using less paper, even if not all organizations become paperless. And Document Management Link and Notes are a critical part of this journey towards less paper in the Sage 300 world. This webinar focuses on tips and tricks for Notes and Document Management Link, part of the Information Manager suite. It's designed for consultants implementing new sites as well as upgrading and for support teams that are troubleshooting your customers' questions. So in this presentation, we will discuss new features, upgrade and setup tips for Notes and Document Management Link. We will then cover some common support questions, including security considerations and using Document Management Link with SharePoint. Some of the tips we will demonstrate in details, others we will point you to the reference documents in the knowledge base and the Document Management Link and Notes help. We will then explore some more creative scenarios of using Notes and Document Management Link. Many of you have probably seen some videos and other presentations describing the more common setup scenarios, such as the Quick Start video for Notes and Document Management Link, which describe how to attach documents to AP invoices and view them when processing payments and reviewing vendor activity records. So we will not look at those more commonly used examples. So let's start with new features in Notes and Document Management Link. As you may have seen from other modules, since the release of version 2022, the latest installer of Orchid modules don't prompt for license details. You enter the serial number and activation code on the Information Manager license screen. We also recently released online help for all of our modules. You can get to the Information Manager help from the Orchid website or straight from this link. Here you have access to Notes and Document Management Link. You'll have your release notes here, links to the training and the user guides. We have a few videos for most modules. You have a quick start for Document Management Link, and then the next video is the more detailed training video on Document Management Link. And then if you keep looking down, you will have a few topics to get started. For most modules, in particular Document Management Link and Notes, you will have the key steps to get started, some tutorials and example setup for commonly used scenario, and then various other links to all the help topics. Now to access all the help topics, you can use the menu on the left-hand side. New features in the last release, with the release of version 2022 of the module, was the ability to include the ORG ID and combinations of the date that you're adding the document when using in the path in Document Management Link. And then we also added the ability to rename a file when you're adding it to SharePoint. So we will look at that a bit later. So let's start with a brief look at the changes to the installation steps. Logged into Sage 300, after you've activated, you can go to Information Manager, Setup, open the license screen, and enter your serial number. Click Save to generate a 30-day trial. If you have an activation code and you enter it, click Save. That will refresh to confirm what modules you're licensed for and how many document management users you are linked for. So a question we often get is, do I need as many DML users as LAN packs? You only need that if all the users who log into Sage 300 need to view and add documents to document management link. If not, you configure which user have access to document management link in the tray icon that is open here. So you choose Options, select DML user for the users who have access to the documents, and because document management link users are concurrent, the first users who log on to Sage and are ticked as DML users will be able to view the documents and add documents. You only need to enter the user and password if you are using SharePoint. And we'll come back to SharePoint into the tray a little bit later. Now that we've activated Information Manager, we can start setting up notes and document management link. And we're going to look at a few tips regarding the setup. First, we'd recommend that you use the Sage Visual Process Flow to guide you through the setup for both notes and document management link. It's just a reminder of all the key steps that are required. There is no specific security settings in Sage 300 Admin Services for notes and document management link. And we will look through the visual process flow as to what controls which users can see what. We'll also touch on using IAM transactions for some user-specific configuration for notes and DML. We will look at the new feature of including the org ID and the year, month, date, or parts thereof of the date that the document is actually added to a document management link. We'll look at a tip for French language users. We will review how to configure document management link using SharePoint and app password when multi-factor authentication is configured on your SharePoint site, and that particularly applies to Office 365. Then we will look at a couple of options around SharePoint, the ability to update the title, which lets you add some more description about the document, and you can do that as you're adding the document in the tray by opening SharePoint automatically. And also a reminder that we have a new feature in Document Management Link for SharePoint, which is the ability to rename the files as they are added to SharePoint. So let's now look at this in Sage 300. So I've activated, I have assigned the visual process flows in administrative services. So now I can look at the visual process flow for document management links and for notes. So let's review notes quickly. We can see the key steps to configure notes, and we will not look at all of them today since we have a quick start video that goes through how to set up notes in detail. So with notes, you set up different note types which have some configuration, including the background color that you see in the tray when you look at them. Whenever you add a new note type, so let's say I'm adding a GL note, a new single one. Once I've added this, I need to go and add this note type to the different roles. In the forthcoming product update, you'll be able to drill down straight to the note roles from the note type screen. So this is a preview of a feature that is coming. And I can look at my roles here, and you see my GL note, nobody, even the administrator, has actually access to that. So I can update, select all the options here. And if I have a different role, maybe the purchase manager, as you can see, they can view a whole lot of customer notes, but they can't view the GL notes, and they can't view or edit the AR item notes, and they can view the customer client notes, but they can't actually edit them. So these give you ideas about how you can use the roles and the note types to set up security in notes. I'll save that. And obviously here under user roles, this is where we assign the users to the different notes roles. Now with document management link, it's a little bit different. There is the only thing that controls whether users can view or add documents in Sage 300 is whether you're configured as an ORCID user. So you can work out through your network folder your user permission on the network, whether users can add documents and whether they can view the documents on that folder. If you need some more granular security on the documents, you can look at using SharePoint. And a reminder that if you want some very specific user configuration, under IM transactions, you have this option called Notes DML Extender User option. And this, when you select use this setting for the user instead of the standard settings, looks very similar to the Notes DML extender setup in IM options. And when you first select it, you have access to all the rows that are configured in IM options. And you can delete the ones you don't want for this user, change them, add some new ones. So this lets you do some very granular settings. We find it very useful for testing purposes when you want to add a new configuration just as admin without changing our overall setup. So I'll say two tips around this. The first one is it can be a bit more difficult to set up because you have to set it up for all users. So this is really an exceptional situation. You would normally use the default option for all users and maybe have one or two users who use their own configuration. Reminder that the rows are added as you select that box. So if I go now and add new records in IM setup options on this tab that apply to all users who use the default settings, it will not change the settings for me as a user. It's happened to me regularly that I've been changing some rows to test something under my user setup. I go back to the default options, add a new configuration, and wonder why it's not appearing on the screen that I'm working with. So tip number 2, when you can't see a configuration that you've just added to IM options and you have refreshed the tray, maybe even logged out of Sage 300 altogether, come and check under IM transactions if you have any user-specific settings. So we're going to look at French language user now. I'm going to log into Sage 300 as a user in French. I'm looking at vendor 1200. I can see the document. As you can see on the screen, the word is numéro de fournisseur, which is a little bit different from what we see in the English language, which is vendor number. And if I check my setup here, I can see I have, and we'll click the F9 detail zoom screen to see. You can see it's saying numéro de fournisseur, which gives me the documents for the French user. And then if I look at the next one, I'm seeing vendor number. Actually, sorry, that's the SharePoint version. Vendor number for the English language. We mentioned a new feature, including org ID in the path. So let's look at an example there. We've configured documents around the GL account screen. We're going to store the documents in a folder by company. So this database is demdat. So I'm going to create, DML is going to create a folder called demdat in there. We're going to create a folder by account, and within that we're going to create one folder per year. So I've amalgamated the two new features into one configuration, but obviously you don't have to use at the same time org ID and YYYY. And this is all documented in the help. So select GL account, and as you can see here, I've actually got an instruction type of note. So that note is showing whenever I open that screen. I can edit the note, and as you can see, the key to this note is GL 1100, which is the unique identifier, the Roto ID of the GL account screen. So I can, and here I have access to my documents, so I can add a document, this one, and now if I click on Explore, you can see that it's gone into the GL documents folder. It has created a folder called demdat, which is the database ID for my database, a folder for the GL account I was looking at, and a subfolder called 2022 because that's the year that we are in, and then the docu file is saved in here. So if I were to export this configuration and import it into another database called ORCLTD, then I wouldn't need to change anything. I would just, on the notes DML extended tray, I can export. So I can export all my records. It will include org ID where appropriate, and then I can import into another database. So this is a little bit of time saving for companies that have multiple databases. Or as a business partner, if you set up some predefined configuration for your customers, you can set it all up on your test demo data and just import it into the customer's site, and it will match their organization ID. And you can put the org ID anywhere in that path where it's appropriate for their setup. Next setup consideration we're going to look at is using document management link with SharePoint, and we will focus on using an app password as it is a newer request that getting fairly common at the moment with Office 365. You don't need to turn multi-factor authentication off when you're using SharePoint and Office 365. However, you need to enable legacy password and you need to configure an app password. So instead of entering your username and your standard password in the DML tray for each user, you would enter the username and the app password that you create for the specific use of using SharePoint. To configure an app password, you need to log on to Microsoft Office 365 as the user you want to use. In this case, test@orchid.systems. If multi-factor authentication is enabled, and if it's the first time you log onto this machine, you will receive a verification code on your phone, and you need to enter the code depending on how your MFA is configured. Then you can go into your account details, choose View Account, Security Info, and you can see the app passwords you've created, or create a new one by choosing Add Method, choosing the app password option, give it a name. That name is only for reference view within Office 365. You don't need to use that name in setting up the email using app password. Then
Office 365 generates a password that you can copy to the clipboard and use. When you're done, you can see that it's there. And if you don't want to use it anymore, you can then come in here and delete it.
Once you have configured the app password in SharePoint, you come in the system, open the system tray, choose options. And for users that do use SharePoint, you enter your username, in my case test@orchid.systems, and then you enter or copy and paste the app password that you have created. Save the tray. We have configured SharePoint on vendor number on the AP vendor screen, and vendor number and document number on the AP invoice entry screen. I'm going to pin the tray, which means when I move my AP invoice screen, the tray moves with it. You can see you're in SharePoint in here because I can see the title column, which hasn't been filled in here. And now I can add a document. I have configured it to open SharePoint as I'm loading the document, which I'm doing here. As you can see, the document has now been renamed as per my configuration. Just show you quickly the configuration. Here you can see I'm renaming it based on value 2, which in this case is the document number, and star.extension, so I'm still using the original document name after the document number. Because I've said to open it in SharePoint, I can now update the title in here. So I'm going to call this the document for the new fiscal year contract. I'm going to save this. Come back to Sage 300, my invoice entry screen. You can see my document is here. Title hasn't been refreshed yet, but there's a new feature in the latest product update. I can now click F5. The document list is refreshed from SharePoint, and you can see I can now see the title in here. And open the document in Word. Now I'd like to take that opportunity to say that in our example here, we have added the document to SharePoint through the tray, which has done the renaming and has populated the columns in SharePoint with those fields. Vendor number 1350 for the vendor number. The title is not used in our filter, but DML field label 2 is set to document number, field value 2 is set to webinar 001, and the Roto ID is set to AP 1200. If you have a third-party program that populates these fields accordingly, so the documents end up in SharePoint and those columns are updated by whatever process you have in SharePoint, those documents will be visible in Sage 300. So you don't have to add the documents through the tray. You can add them to SharePoint. And that actually also applies to network folder. If you add a document that fits the configuration in DML, and that can be through a third-party process or through an extended script that creates a document and saves it in the right folder with the right naming convention, then you can view it in Document Management Link. Let's now have a look at a few common support questions with Notes and Document Management Link. As you're probably aware, a lot of these questions are answered in the knowledge base that you can access from the Orchid website when you are logged in as a business partner. And we've got different sections here, Document Management Link, Notes, and you can search. And that is in addition to the online help. So we've touched on this in the previous presentation, but we'll show you how you can pin the tray, and it is useful in most cases to pin the tray. Then you can, when you move your AP screen or your OE screen or your GL screen, the notes and the document tray move together. You can export your IM options from one company and import it to another. And again, we've already seen that before. Next tip we can look at is occasionally you get an error trying to create a new GL or updating IC options, saying that not all users are logged out. If you are running Information Manager and the tray is running, this actually is considered locking the IC options and preventing users from creating the GL year. So what you need to do for that is close the tray. So let's have a quick look at that. So I've got my tray running here, and I'm trying to go and update my IC options. So you're getting this message: you cannot update inventory control options until all other users have left inventory control and all other inventory control windows are closed. So first you think, oh, it's because I've got some IM options open, so you're going to try again. Same error. This is because the tray is running. So to fix that, you can close the tray and try again. It's now working. It's the same when you use the GL create new year. Easiest way to restart the tray is to log out of Sage 300. So when I try and create a new GL year, I'm getting this. So just remember, if the tray is running, you have to close it before you can run that process. Let's look at a few common support questions regarding notes. First is, can we import notes? Yes, you can. You can import notes from both CSV files and from Excel. If you're importing from CSV file, your file must have note type, a key, a category, and a text. And note type and key are mandatory fields. If you're importing from Excel, there's a template in the EBXXA folder, so EB69A for version 2022, and it's called notes import.xlsm, and it has instructions on how to use that, and that is documented in the notes help. Notes can be as long as you want, and therefore they are saved in multiple tables and multiple. So if you want to display a note, you would use the EBDoc table and not the EBNote. The EBNote only has the first 250 characters. And the article referred in there has the a sample query to link the tables together so that you can display the full content of the note in a report. Or customer number change and notes. Customer number change does not update the key value in note. So if you are running a large customer number change or customer number change, you need to update the note with a new key. You can do that directly in SQL Management Studio, and we have provided an example in that knowledge base article, which obviously you need to do a test and back up your database before you run the SQL query after customer number change. With Document Management Link, a common question is issues with drag and drop, and generally this is security around the user that is running Sage 300, and that happens often if UAC is turned on, or if you are running Sage as administrator and there is a discrepancy between the network user who's logged onto the machine and the user administrator who is running Sage and therefore the tray. So the solution for that is to not use run as administrator. Give the user that is logged onto the machine sufficient rights to run Sage. We have already discussed that you can view documents that are added to the network folder or to SharePoint through some other application. You don't have to always add the documents through the tray. Finally, a little consideration around the folder size and performance. If you have a very, very large folder with all invoices or all documents, and you're filtering based on the fields and can apply to SharePoint, or you could filtering based on the document name if you're using network folder. If there's lots and lots of documents, it can get a little bit slower when you first open the screen, and so you may want to consider creating some other folders, folder by vendor, folder by year, and archiving some of the documents. You can then set up your document management link to show folders and files. So on the show folders, you've got that options of seeing files only or folders and files. If you're seeing folders and files, you can then from one box on the tray, you can see all the different folders, click on there and find the archived documents that you are after. We're now going to move on and look at a few creative setup for notes. So they're beyond what you find in the quick start for notes and document management link. And the first one we're going to look at is how to include pictures in notes and display them in Crystal reports. Basically, there are two ways of adding your pictures in notes. You can copy and paste a picture into the notes entry screen, and you would have seen an example of that in the Orchid sampled database. Main limitation is that it can make your database grow quite big. You would have to limit it to relatively small images and a small number of images. In addition, often the reason why you want to add the note in Sage 300, add the image in Sage 300, is so that you can display it in a Crystal report, for example, in a quote or even on an invoice. And to do that, you can just save the path to the image in a note, and then you can include that path in Crystal reports. So again, this is documented in this knowledge base article in a lot of detail, so I'm not going to go through all the steps, but you create a note type, assign it a role, and then you add your row configuration so that you can attach the note to each item. So in this case, the note is going to be attached to an item, and I'm going to copy the path to where the file is saved into a note. So it needs to be a UNC path for all users to have access to it. And here we're giving you an example import file to import the note against each item. But what I'm going to show you is how we configure Crystal report to use the image file location. So this is a sample report that has that image. So we add the image to the file, but on the format graphic, we configure two main things on that image. First is your suppressed condition, so that we suppress the image if there is no note, or if the note is blank, or if there is a note but the note is not of type item picture. And then under the picture there's this little graphic location. So you can see that what we've put in there is a formula called file lock. And if I look at this formula in Crystal, cancel this. If I look at this formula in Crystal, you can see that it is reading the note from the EB note table. So our sample report is linking, you can see that in here, the IC item table and the EB note based on the key. And then I'm reading the path to the file location where the image is saved in my note. And once I've done that, when I run my Crystal report, I can see the image next to each item description. Again, this is not for everyone, but it is a very useful thing thing to remember, that you can use Note to store the file location of an image and include that image in a report. Finally, we're going to look at some example scenarios with Document Management Link. First, let's look at how to configure Document Management Link with optional fields, knowing that that also applies to Notes actually. We have configured two records in IAM options regarding optional fields. One is network folder, so documents on the order entry screen, just linked to the label called optional field. So we're going to create one folder for each optional field that is configured in OE. The other one is a note that is configured on optional field and value, and the note type is called account number. So let's see what that means in practice in the OE screen. So if I open this order 01 and go to the optional fields tab, as I'm looking at the different, I'm navigating through the different optional fields. If I look at AC, so here I've got AC 1200 and I've got a note. UPS zone, for example, white, I've got a note that says there's a bad weather warning for UPS zone white. If I change to another zone, you can see I don't have a note anymore, but I could then come in here because I've got rights to add the note. I can add a new note called account number for, oops, I'm on the wrong, I should be on the UPS. So for UPS zone blue, because the freight to this zone has changed, so I can save that. If I look at order 2 and go to its optional fields tab, when I navigate through, when I'm in my looking at UPS zone blue, I can see the note relating to that particular value of that particular optional field. That's because I had two fields in my configuration, optional field and the value. I've also got the ability to add a document for that particular optional field, for that UPS zone. So I can add, I'm not renaming, so I can add, so when I'm now looking at another optional field, I'm not seeing it, but if I come back to the UPS zone, I can actually see the document that's attached to that optional field. And that is not dependent on the value. So if I look at another order which has maybe UPS zone red, I should still see the same document. So again, depending on what you're trying to do, you can change your configuration. Then we will look at an example of setting up Document Management Link around purchase orders. And for that, I'll be joined by Anne. Over to you, Anne.
There are many different documents associated with purchase orders. You have quotes with requisitions, you've got the purchase order document itself, and then you might have multiple receipts against a purchase order and an invoice or multiple invoices against a receipt. And you may want to store this information in different ways for access in PO and in accounts payable. You may want to store all the information in a single folder per vendor, or you may want to break up the documents so that you have all the associated delivery documents and invoices with the purchase order. But in my case, I'm going to have a folder per purchase order. In there, I'm going to save my purchase order documentation, plus any delivery information, and I'm going to have a separate folder for the vendor for all the invoices. And the documents will be visible both in PO where relevant and in AP where relevant. Starting off in purchase orders, once we identify our vendor, in this folder we have configured the individual purchase order to be shown. And in this folder we will show all the purchase orders, or the folders for all the purchase orders for the vendor. We have also configured notes for the item to be shown at the same time. Once the PO is complete, using extender, we're going to create a PDF of this particular purchase order and save it in the folder. And now the PDF has been created and saved in the purchase order folder. Refreshing our list, we can see for vendor 8830 we now have the individual purchase order and a folder which has that purchase order configured in. So when we look at a vendor with multiple purchase orders, this is purchase order 53. Here we see the individual document for purchase order 53, but we also see all the folders for all the purchase orders for this vendor in case we want to double check one of the previous purchase orders while we're creating this particular purchase order. And now doing a receipt for that purchase order 55. Even at the time of receipt, we can still have access to the purchase order. If we go ahead and receive some of these items and post the document, at this stage we can file away the delivery documentation, either by dragging and dropping from email or by dragging and dropping from our scanned folder. And for our purchase order, we have all the associated documentation building up. So if we do multiple receipts or have multiple pieces of paper to file away, we can store it all in the same folder. And this box here is just a detail of this folder. And when we come to invoicing, once we identify the receipt that we're invoicing, because the PO number is still accessible, we can still have access to the purchase order folder and we can see the delivery details. And at this stage we can file away the invoice documentation too. Assuming I have that in email, I can file away either the attached PDF, or if appropriate, I can file away the entire email. And document management link has been configured to rename any attachment that's dragged into this particular box using the invoice number on the screen. And after running day end, these transactions have been configured to be shown in AP as well. So against AP invoice entry, we've configured to look at the documents for this particular invoice. We are also seeing all the invoices and documents for this vendor. In this case, we only have one, as well as the delivery documentation associated with the PO and the PO itself. And this is all possible because we have the PO number on the screen, as well as the invoice number on the screen and the vendor number on the screen. Looking at the configuration needed, first on the purchase order entry screen, This box labeled number 1 is showing us all the purchase orders, the folders of all the purchase orders for this particular vendor. And at this stage we only have the one. And the purchase order folders are in the vendors directory in the PO documents folder. This document list number 2 is now showing us the contents of the individual purchase order folder, so all the documents that have been filed away for PO 55. Similarly, for the PO receipt entry, we have the 2 document list box. The first one showing us the purchased orders for that particular vendor, and the second one showing us the contents of the particular purchase order that we're looking at on the screen. And for the purchase invoice entry screen, we are showing the contents of the purchase order folder using the same configuration settings that we used for the purchase order and the purchase receipt entry screens, as well as the documents in the AP documents folder for the vendor, filtering by the invoice number. And similarly, on the AP invoice entry, and we can see this also in AP vendor inquiry or against the AP vendor, we can see the individual invoice in the first box. In the second box, we're viewing all the invoice documents related with this particular vendor. And in the third box, we're showing the contents of the folder belonging to the particular purchase order.
Thank you, Anne. And now for some more creative setup of document management link, I welcome Nancy from RLA, who most of you know, and she will give us some examples of using DML with GL, AP and finders, and some tips on using the tray. Over to you, Nancy.
Let's have a look at how we can use document management link around GL journal entries. Some of you may be aware that within each subledger of Sage 300, you can choose the information that passes through to the GL journal entries. So for example, around my AP invoices, when a transaction gets posted through to the general ledger, I've chosen that the GL detail reference will contain the vendor number, and the GL detail description field will contain the document number and the document type. So in doing this, when it passes through to a general ledger entry, that information is contained within the reference and description fields on the journal entry screen. By doing this, it allows me to store documents around information that isn't natively stored on the GL journal entry screen. So when we look at the reference field, it contains the vendor number. I can configure document management link around that reference field, storing the vendor information, and thereby I can view documents related to my vendor. Likewise, within the description field, I'm storing the invoice information, which would give me the ability to view the backup documents related to the invoice. So with document management link, you can get creative in configuring fields on a screen using the reference and description fields to store information that isn't natively stored on that screen, and then link to those fields to store backup documentation around that information. Another way that you can be creative with your configuration of document management link is to configure around the finders. So you notice when I open up the order entry screen, we have our standard document management link window that's showing me the order number where I can store documents around a particular order, around OE invoices, around the order confirmation, as well as the purchase order. But in addition, you can do configuration around fields and utilize the ability to view or store documents around your finders. So for example, when I click the finder to choose a customer, you notice a document management link window appears showing me documents related to the customer number. Now, Something like that you may want to have appear in the standard document management link window, but I've also done a configuration around price lists because that may be something that you want to be able to view when you're entering an order. So when I open up the Finder for my items, you'll notice I have the window appearing showing me backup related to my items. And when I choose that item, I can then move over to the price list, and I can open up the Finder related to the price list where I can store a copy of the documents for each of the price lists. So it gives me a way to view the price list information without having to leave the order entry screen, just by configuring around this field. And when I open up the Finder, I can see the different price lists. So you notice I can see the retail price list, but as I click down into a different price list, I can have it show me now the UK price list. So it's a unique way for you to be able to configure document management link and utilize it around the finders. Let's have a look at document management link around the AP invoice entry screen so we can show you a few additional tips for utilizing features within document management link. So when I open up the AP invoice entry screen, you'll notice the standard document management link window is going to appear. And I just want to highlight a few additional features that are available. If you notice the button at the top of the document management link window, this gives you a quick and easy way to navigate to the folders that have been configured for document management link. When I click on this button, you'll see a list of all of the configurations around this screen. And with just the click, I can navigate directly to the folder where the documents are being stored. So in this case, they're on my C drive in a folder I've named Orchid, Documents, AP Documents, and then my vendor 1200 based on what's been called up on the AP invoice entry screen. So it's a quick and easy way for you to navigate directly to the folders from the document management link window. Another feature that you may not be aware of is the ability for you to drag and drop emails directly into the document management link window. So when I open up my email, I have an email here that has some attachments to it. So I can choose to click on an email and drag it and drop it into the document management link window, and it is going to save a copy as a message file. So I can store that in my folders for document management link. But I can also just drag the attachment off of an email. So I can click on a document and drag that and drop it over the document management link window. And what it's done is it's taken a copy of my message as well as the attachment, and it has stored it in my vendor number folder. So if we navigate to the vendor number folder, you'll see that it's stored here as a message and the attachment. So a quick and easy way for you to utilize the ability to store email messages or attachments from email directly into your document management link window. When you're configuring document management link, you require the correct field name to configure the software to have the documents appearing beside a window. And in some cases, you also need the Roto ID, which is the screen number for you to configure against. So we've included a tool that will help you with doing that configuration. You can open up any Sage 300 screen and click into the field that you want to configure documents against, and then open up what we call the tray icon. When you open up the options for the tray icon, you can click in any field, and you'll notice that it will populate the Roto ID and field name for you to configure against. So this is a way for us to assist you when you're doing the configuration. The other place that is handy to use this tool is against any other third-party screen in Sage 300. So you can configure document management link around all screens of Sage 300, but you may not be aware that you can also configure document management link around third-party modules. The way to know whether you can use document management link with those third-party modules is by using this tool. You can go to any screen in those modules, and if you can get a Roto ID and field name, then you can configure document management link for those products as well.
Thanks, Nancy, for this presentation on using document management link with GL, AP, the finders, price list, and tips on using the tray. We can configure document management link and notes with third-party modules such as Terox, Resource Manager from Norming, RMA and EFT from Orchid. We have demonstrated using document management link and EFT in a recent webinar, so I'll refer you to this presentation. We've looked at new features, upgrade and setup tips, discussed some common support questions, and demonstrated some detailed example setup scenarios beyond the traditional quick start. And now it's time for Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, so we now have about 5 minutes for questions, which you can pop up in the questions box since you're all in listen-only mode. And I'll start with the first question is, can the tray remain open even though no users are logged into the Sage company? So no, the tray should close when you close the Sage desktop. So occasionally with some product updates, if you're switching between companies and you don't close one company, but just keep opening the company, then you may end up with multiple trays. But the minute you close the Sage desktop, that should all close. Next question is, can I add documents to cloud-based storage such as OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox? The short answer is yes. If you're using document management link with network folder, then it will work when you sync your cloud storage to your local drive. So you need to configure the syncing with, let's say, OneDrive. You can activate the option to free up some space, I think it's called, in OneDrive, so that the document is by default stored in the cloud only. But when you double click on it in document management link, it will then trigger the download onto your local machine, and you can open it and view it. Since we tried to be a bit more creative in this webinar, I'll also throw to you that there's another approach with cloud-based storage, is you could save the path to the document in Orchid Note. So that's a different approach. You can't drag and drop, you can't rename, so you don't have access to this document management link functionality. However, if you copy and paste the link into a note, that could be useful if you're trying to add a link to that report, or to that document rather, in a Crystal report or in an email. And you could use something similar to what we've showed you in the picture example with the file path. So you could have your images saved in a shared folder, in a cloud storage folder, and then add the path to the Crystal report, like the example we looked at in this presentation. Next question is document type. Yes, you can include any document type in document management link. So your PDF, JPEG, Excel, Word. We've looked at an example of including an MSG file, so an email. And when you double click on the file to open it through the tray, it will use the default program that is configured on your machine. Can we attach documents into any documents done with any language? Yes, you can. Basically, the example we've looked at with the French language, that applies to any language where Sage has a language layer. For example, if you're using Sage 300 in Spanish and the field label on the screen is different from the field label when you use the English language, then you will, and you have users who use Sage in both English and with the Spanish language configuration, you may need to do 2 rows in Information Manager for that same field, one with each language field label. But if you use another language, to store your documents. So if your Windows profile is using a different language, such as Arabic, but the Sage screens are still in English, then you don't need to do anything special in DML. You can just attach your documents in whatever language they're saved in, and they will be open as they came. Another question is, do the documents get compressed when you do the drag and drop? No, when you drag and drop or attach them to the document management link tray, it's an exact copy of the document that is in the folder that you're dragging it from. No compression, no nothing. If you want to make them smaller or compressed, you have to do that before you drag and drop into DML. So another question here, is there a feature that allows the Orchid workflow module to allow signature process on AP documents that will then link to document management link? That's a great question. There is there's no out of the box, I would say, feature for that. However, we have done an app using Orchid Workflow and Adobe Sign, which we demonstrated in a webinar a few months ago. So I can send you the link to that recording separately, and that then lets you approve documents by signing them using Adobe Sign. Or you could do the same thing using DocuSign, being a legally binding signature. That's one approach using the workflow. You could also use less legally binding way, I guess, which is to scan your signature and attach your signed document to DML. But in answer to that is I will send you the recording to a link to that webinar where we're demonstrating using Adobe Sign to give you some ideas as to what we can do with the workflow and DML. That's a little bit beyond what I can show you on the fly today. How can we import documents from an external application into DML module and auto-link with the entry screens, etc.? Okay, if you have an external system that saves the document, your external system basically has to save the document in the right folder. So if you've configured, let's look at an example here. If you have configured, let's look at this. No, we won't use SharePoint. We'll look at this one. You've configured in this example on the AP invoice screen to create a folder per vendor in that subfolder called Custom Documents, AP Documents. You're creating one folder per vendor, and within that, you're renaming your file based on the document number. So if your external application creates a file called invoice 123 in a folder, in a subfolder 1200, if you then have an invoice called INV 123 for vendor 1200, then document management link will display it when you're looking at that invoice. So you can drag it into the tray, you can click add and add it directly into the tray, but anything, and then I do this as user A. When I log into Sage as user B, DML will find that document. So your third-party application can create the document the same way. Instead of dragging it into the tray, it just saves it in the right path, in the right folder. So hopefully that clarifies that. If not, you can contact us, ask us some more specific questions, and we can get back to you separately. In case my network storage is full, how can I archive and keep the copy and history still linked as a document? Look, DML there's nothing stored in the database with document management link. So if you were to archive your documents, let's say I want to move all this into an archive because it was from last year, you can move that into an archive folder, and possibly you would create a new row in IM options to point to your archive folder so that you can still access it from some of the main screen in Sage 300. That's what I would look at doing. Okay, what's the benefit of using SharePoint versus network folder? I guess the benefit is really linked around the benefits of SharePoint. From a document management link point of view, with SharePoint, it works very similarly whether you use network folder or SharePoint. You can view your documents against the Sage 300 screens. The main difference from a user point of view is you can see that title, so you have a little bit of extra information. But using SharePoint has the benefit of more granular security. So you can use all the SharePoint things to say these users can view these documents. You can have different sites for different types of libraries for different types of documents. And then within SharePoint, you also have access to some workflow functionality within SharePoint around your document. So I don't really, don't have any examples set up for that, but that's generally why people would. That's the two main reasons why people would use SharePoint. For full functionality in Notes and Document Management Link, does the client need a licensed version of Extender 2? No, you don't need Extender. If you're to just see notes and document management links, you don't need Extender. The only so the notes that we see here, for example, it's been entered manually or it's been imported, so you don't need Extender for that. But within a note, but Extender and Note work well together for some, additional functionality, I guess. One being that you can create notes automatically when some fields change in Sage 300 using Extender. So for example, when the credit limit changes in the accounts receivable on the customer, Extender can be configured to create a note, and then you can view that note on other Sage screen. So that type of functionality requires both Extender and Notes, but you can use Notes provided you're going to enter your notes manually or through import. You can use Notes without Extender. I think we've run out of time and I can't see any other questions. So thank you very much for your time. We will send you a recording to today's presentation in the next few days. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next month for the next webinar. Thank you.